because Iran has been in this weakened position, certainly we know that there's been substantial damage, at least, to its nuclear facilities by these American and Israeli strikes. We know that their ballistic missile armory has been severely damaged as well by Israeli strikes. So perhaps because they're in a weaker position, they might agree to those kind of conditions. But they've, from their perspective, they've emerged surviving this war, and so often in these kind of conflicts, a country like Iran sees just the mere act of survival as a form of victory, especially for a regime that's deeply unpopular with its own people at home. And so perhaps it will feel confident enough to try and push back.
In geopolitical terms, Iran and Israel have very clearly stated aims. For Iran, it's to wipe Israel off the map, and for Israel, it's to never allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. Both countries now hold a new shared mission to maintain a ceasefire that has been imposed and insisted upon them by Donald Trump. Now, it got off to, as I was saying, a shaky start this morning, with both sides firing off their last salvos, to the visible irritation of Donald Trump, who, whilst boarding Marine One en route to the NATO summit at The Hague, gave this pithy verdict on the warring neighbours.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what they're doing. Do you understand that?
Yeah, you can fill in the blank. Genuinely cross Donald Trump there, especially so with Israel. But a number of hours on from that fury, there does appear to be a ceasefire that's somewhat, or seems to be holding, suggesting Trump's attempts to regain control seems to be working and keeping the tab on Israel and Iran. Also in the last hour, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said his country has never had a better friend in the White House. For the latest on events, we can speak live now to the foreign correspondent of Channel 4 News, Secunder Kermani, who's in Jordan tonight, having just left Israel from where he's been reporting on the ground. Good evening, Secunder.
Hi, Neil. Good to be with you.
Hi, nice to have you with us. This ceasefire, then, it does appear to be working for now. Is that what you're noticing?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, ceasefires often in various parts of the world often get off to shaky starts with, either side on the battlefield wanting to have the last blow effectively, even in the kind of ultimate hours just before a ceasefire comes into place. This was made perhaps extra confusing by the very convoluted language that President Trump used to announce the ceasefire in the early hours of the morning local time last night, talking variously about 6, 12 and 24-hour periods. In the end, it came into place around 7 in the morning Israeli time. After that, or up until that, I should say, we saw quite a few barrages of Iranian ballistic missiles fired towards Israel. They started around 5:30 in the morning. One of them directly hit a residential building in the southern city of Beersheba, killing at least 4 people there. That's one of the deadlier incidents for Israel. And overnight prior to that, Israel had been striking Iran very, very hard. People in Tehran and elsewhere in the country saying it was one of the worst nights of airstrikes that they had suffered since the conflict began. There was a particularly shaky moment which prompted that angry outburst from President Trump when Israel accused Iran of having fired 2 ballistic missiles after the ceasefire, after the ceasefire came into place, and then said it was going to retaliate with its own strikes. President Trump then saying that on social media, Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do it, it is a major violation. Bring your pilots home now. I mean, that's unprecedented language, really. I mean, probably in global diplomacy, but certainly for an American president to use directed towards an Israeli ally. But it worked. And Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to have massively scaled back any attack on Iran that they were planning. In the end, it seemed to be a much more targeted single strike. For what it's worth, Iran denies that it had launched those missiles. So, a degree of fog of war about the whole situation. But certainly as we go into the night now, for the first time in over a week, the skies seem quiet above this region.
Look, I mean, apart from the actual not firing missiles into Israel or Israel putting new strikes into Iran, the thing that I find striking is that there's no other conditions, it seems to me, that have been attached to the ceasefire. No demands upon Israel with regards to ending enrichment programs or allowing inspectors in. So I mean, it's just it's a cessation of violence, but there's no change fundamentally to what's demanded upon Iran.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, you'll remember that there were discussions taking place between Iran and the United States before Israel decided to launch its strikes, triggering this war between Israel and Iran. And those negotiations had been pretty stuck because the US was demanding that Iran completely give up all uranium enrichment. In other words, its entire nuclear program. Iran was saying we'll agree to certain limits, but we certainly are not going to go that far. Now, at the moment, it's not clear whether there could be any kind of resolution to that now. I mean, perhaps because Iran has been in this weakened position, certainly we know that there's been substantial damage, at least, to its nuclear facilities by these American and Israeli strikes. We know that their ballistic missile armory has been severely damaged as well by Israeli strikes. So perhaps because they're in a weaker position, they might agree to those kind of conditions. But they've, from their perspective, they've emerged surviving this war, and so often in these kind of conflicts, a country like Iran sees just the mere act of survival as a form of victory, especially for a regime that's deeply unpopular with its own people at home. And so perhaps it will feel confident enough to try and push back and resist any kind of attempts to impose those kind of conditions. Those are certainly the kind of public noises that Iranian officials are coming out with. But also, I mean, there's a big uncertainty about exactly how much damage has been done. I mean, we know America dropped these, more than a dozen 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs, but because the sites that they were targeting, the key sites in particular, are underground, no one has any real sense of exactly how much damage has been done. I mean, an Israeli official telling local media here that they believe that the nuclear program has been set back by years, but certainly not completely dismantled. A CNN report suggesting that perhaps it's only been set back by months. So there's also 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that the Iranians are said to have pulled out from the sites that got bombed prior to them being attacked. So there's definitely an incentive for the US and for Israel to also reach some kind of resolution with Iran about its nuclear program, to try and keep tabs on it.
So briefly, you've obviously just been in Israel for a good bit of time. I mean, how will this be viewed in Israel and politically for Netanyahu? As this sort of conflict and the way it's resolved so far, is it being chalked down as a victory, as a success for the Israeli government?
Absolutely. I mean, this war with Iran received broad public support in Israel. It was seen by the vast majority of Israelis as being justified. They view the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran as an existential threat. Now, that's interestingly very different to the way that most Israelis now, at this stage, view the war in Gaza, which is, of course, still going on, where 70% around of the population would be willing to see an end to the conflict there in Gaza in exchange for the return of the hostages. And many people blame Prime Minister Netanyahu for perpetuating that war, they say, for reasons of his own political survival. So there has been a bump in support for Netanyahu, which is significant because his popularity had taken a huge amount of damage after the October the 7th attacks. Some suggesting that perhaps this episode could lead him to call early elections because he feels he's in a position of strength. Perhaps he could even work towards some kind of resolution to the war, the conflict in Gaza, because he was no longer so dependent on his far-right coalition partners who are propping his government up but don't want to see an end to that conflict. But at the same time, Netanyahu's always said a condition of ending the war in Gaza has to be the disarmament of Hamas. That's been a major sticking point, of insurmountable up until now, sticking point between the two sides. And it's not clear how that circle is squared yet.
Okay, Secunder, we'll see what tomorrow and the days ahead brings. Secunder Kermani, thanks very much for your time tonight.